Hello, and welcome to the video series on the Beginner's Guide to Research Literacy. I'm Lavera Crawley, a researcher and educator chaplain in Berkeley, California. This is part 2 of the series. In part 1, we looked at different types of research methods, qualitative methods, quantitative, mixed methods, and we even peeked at the newest trend, big data. And in addition, we explored differences in quality or robustness of types of research studies. Now, once one has a handle on the different types of research, you next ask the question is, how do I find what's out there? And then once I find the articles, how do I actually get my hands on them to read them? So that was what we did in part 1. To review the objectives, at the end of the webinar, participants could identify the differences between types of research approaches, and were able to identify strategies for finding and accessing the research articles that were relevant to your area of interest. If you haven't seen part 1, I do recommend that you watch that first. Now, I know it's about 30 minutes as a video, so prepare for that in advance. If you haven't seen it, or you don't want to take the time now, or if you're more advanced in your research literacy, then the invitation stands to visit that video when you can. But back to our roadmap. Once you've entered into the research world of databases, journal articles, and other published literature, you're going to fast discover that there are hundreds or even thousands of articles and publications relevant to your interests. And each day, the numbers grow. So your response might be, whoa, now that I know how to find and access the articles, there are so many. How do I keep up? So this leads us to part 2 of the series, how to speed read a research article. One thing that's important to say here regarding part 1 is that it laid the context for this presentation about a presentation. So the first part does explain what I mean by that. In short, these original slideshows were part of a webinar that I offered to a national audience of hospital chaplains. Your faculty at CIS thought it was a good idea to show you how a professional discipline enters into an engagement with research. So those of you who are watching this video now, you're about to see me perform, if you will, the slideshow presentation that was originally designed and presented to chaplains. So you're like a voyeur, and I'm inviting you to see this presentation now, first through your beginner's mind eyes, that is, focusing on the objectives for this presentation, and let me review those very quickly. By the end of this webinar or this presentation, you're going to be able to know the steps for speed reading a research article. You'll understand how research articles are structured, and you're going to use that structure then to facilitate your speed reading. And then you're going to have an opportunity to practice putting all the ideas from the first video, which are about finding and accessing an article, and you're going to put that together with the steps for speed reading, and you're going to actually learn how to speed read an article. So that's the first set of eyes that I invite you to look at this presentation from, your beginner's mind eyes. And then I invite a second set of eyes, the ones of your observer self. Watch how a professional discipline enters into engagement with research. Okay? So with that, let's get started. How do you speed read a research article? Well, why do you do it, first of all? The research enterprise creates well over 1 million new articles annually. And in any given health profession, this could mean needing to keep up with tens of thousands of articles a year. Although the number of evidence-based chaplaincy articles that are published each year is still a manageable number, The task of keeping up can easily get out of hand if one starts searching the medical, the nursing, the social work literature as well, or any other related professional literature, if you're looking for any of the studies that are relevant to providing spiritual care. So with all that volume that's out there, what's a chaplain to do? Let me tell you what physicians do. Physicians often speed read research articles to first glean the gist of it, and then secondly, to quickly determine if they need to read the entire article in more detail. So that's what I want to teach you, how physicians often approach the vast volume of articles that they've got to keep up with. They speed read, and here's the method. The first step is to read the title. Second, read the abstract. Third, figure out the purpose of the study. 4, read all the figures and tables that are in the article. And lastly, go back and reread the abstract. So we're going to take each one of these step by step. So here's the first one. It may be obvious. Read the title. Now, you've already done, you're probably at the stage of doing a literature search quickly, and you're in a database, and it's just going to list you just the titles. So you want to know, you're going to read the title, determining if it's descriptive enough to give you a really good idea of what it's about. You want to know if it's relevant, right? And so does it give you a good idea of what it's about? And lastly, does it actually even capture your attention? So you've read the title. The next step in, if you've read the title and you've decided, yeah, this is one worth looking into, and you've got now the abstract, you're going to read the abstract to get a sense of the who, the what, the when, the where, the how of the article, of the study, I mean. And then you're going to look at what the researchers found. That's step 2, read the abstract. Step 3, figuring out the purpose of the study. Now, how do you find that? There's a hint. If you look at the last paragraph in the paper, that's right before the methods section, you'll find how the author has described the purpose of the study. It's just kind of a formula. It's often in the last paragraph before the methods section. If it's not there, it's going to be somewhere close by, so you read around. Now, what do I mean by methods section? Research articles are actually structured. So to understand about the different sections, let's review how research papers are structured. This is how most research articles are set up. Starts off with an abstract, followed by a section called background or introduction. Sometimes it may just say context. Maybe it might not even have a heading to it, but that's what that next section, the first section after the abstract, is about. Next, then, they'll list the methods, followed by the results and findings from the study. And lastly, their reflections, their conclusions, and any discussion about that. This is how research articles are structured. Let's take each one of those, starting with the abstract. And it turns out that abstracts themselves come in 2 forms, structured or unstructured. A structured abstract will actually replicate the structure of the article. I hope this shows up on your screen, but if not, this is a snapshot of a research article. The title of it was Predictors of Spiritual Care Provision for Patients with Dementia at the End of Life as Perceived by Physicians, a Prospective Study. The abstract then is divided into the background, the methods, the results, and the conclusions. Again, it's the same structure of the journal paper, but you can also have abstracts that are unstructured. Here's a snapshot of a different one. Relationships between psychosocial spiritual well-being and end-of-life preferences and values in African American dialysis patients. As you see, the abstract is just a large paragraph. It doesn't have the nice sections of the structure of the abstract there, but each of those sections, a background, the methods, the results, and the conclusions, are going to be there in that paragraph. They're just not structured for you. So that is your abstract. The next part of a paper is the background or introduction section. Like I said, it could be also called context, and sometimes they may not even have a heading for it. But what the purpose of that whole section is to let you know what we already know about the subject and what we don't know, and why it's important to know more. In that section, you're going to have the study aims or the purpose of the paper or of the study that they performed. And you'll find that in the last paragraph of the background section, which is the paragraph right before the method section. We'll come back to that. The next section then is the methods section. It shows the specific design strategies that were used for choosing the participants, collecting the data, and analyzing what they found. After the methods section then, there's the results and findings, which shows what data they had, and they usually put the figures and tables in this section as well. The final section of a paper is the conclusions or the discussions. And they look at how the results were interpreted and also look at what were the limitations of the findings. So this is the structure of articles. Let's use that now to go back and speed read an article. So we're now at the methods section. We're going back to our method. And we're on stage 3, figuring out the purpose of the study. And I told you to look at the last paragraph in the background or the introduction section, or the section right before the methods. And if it's not there, it's going to be close by. That's step 3. Step 4, let's start looking at the results by looking at the figures and tables. A really good study is going to summarize all the important results using either figures or tables or both. A good study will do that, and a great study will make those visuals so full of good information and designed and presented in a way that you can really get the information just by looking at them. Now, some of these tables will be filled with numbers, and if you're not a numbers person, if you're not a quantitative person, don't let the tables with lots of numbers intimidate you. Approach it like looking at a work of art. And let's say you don't know anything, like myself, about, or at least at some point in my life, about looking at art. And I want to thank Alec for saying, all right, don't let the art intimidate you. Just take it in sections. What's the artist doing with color? Now just take color and look at all the ways in that canvas the artist has used color. Now look at line or space or light. So that's the way you might approach looking at a work of art if you're not schooled in art. That's the same way I want you to approach looking at tables of numbers. So you may not be a statistician, and indeed some of these tables may look quite complicated, and they are, but don't let that intimidate you. Approach it like you're looking at a work of art. How have they structured these tables? What are the headings? What are the columns? What are the things? Are there anything standing out, like something highlighted or something with an asterisk? Just look at that and see if you can see some pattern, even if you don't know much about the sophisticated statistics that they may be using in that table. Don't let numbers intimidate you. Not all studies even have tables, particularly qualitative studies. In that case, you're going to look at the headings that they've used in the results section. That's step 4. We're now back to step 5, which is rereading the abstract to consolidate what you've gleaned from all the previous steps. Okay, I've told you how to speed read an article, gone through what the steps were, defined how papers are structured. Let's give it a try. Let's practice. Now this is going to pull from some of the things that we learned from part 1. So here we go. Let's first find an article. And here's the scenario. Remember, for this original presentation, it was for chaplains. So let me share with you a typical scenario through which a chaplain might find him or herself wanting, or themselves wanting to find an article. So clinical chaplains, hospital chaplains, work on a clinical unit along with an interdisciplinary team that's made up of the physicians, the nurses, the occupational or respiratory therapists or physical therapists, and the social workers and other professions that are there. So they are part of this interdisciplinary team representing the spiritual care process. So you usually have interdisciplinary rounds of team in the mornings, and let's say you just got to work and you are going to have interdisciplinary rounds in about 30 minutes. You happen to know that you're going to be discussing 3 patients on your clinical unit who have dementia. The social workers are concerned that the demands that the disease burden of dementia for each of these patients has now exceeded the resource capacities of their home. In other words, they're not going to be able to safely be discharged back to their home, and the social workers are trying to find placement opportunities for them, perhaps in nursing homes or what's called long-term care facilities. So if you're the chaplain, you're going to be interested in what's the latest research regarding spiritual care for patients with dementia or around their caregivers who are concerned about them. And you'd like to know this before rounds, so you've got now 38 minutes left, 37 maybe, and you've got to quickly find some articles and read them. Where do you start? So again, from part 1, we looked at strategies for finding and accessing research articles. And because we're in a hurry, we're just going to start searching the online databases to look for an article. In particular, I'm going to start with PubMed. What I'm going to do is fill into the search box spiritual and dementia in the PubMed URL, the PubMed website. And when I click on that and click search, it gives me 111 articles that have both spiritual and dementia as relevant keywords. Now, remember, I'm in a hurry, so I'm going to want to find the research articles quickly to be able to read them completely. So I'm going to limit my search to those articles that PubMed can provide for me where there is free, full text. And again, part 1 of the video really covers this quite well. So we're going to look for free, full text. And now it's limited now to 15 articles out of that 111. So I'm going to quickly scan them. I'm going to start my speed reading even at this point, reading the titles, looking to see are they descriptive enough to give me a good idea what it's about and whether it captures my attention. That means, is it relevant to the patients that are on my unit right now and that we're going to be discussing later in rounds. I read through the titles and I come across one that captures my attention. It's titled Living Well with Dementia, Enhancing Dignity and Quality of Life Using a Novel Intervention, Dignity Therapy. I'm intrigued. And it told me that I can get a free full text on it, so I'm going to try to get it. And sure enough, when I click on it in PubMed, it gives me the abstract. And I want to go further with the steps of my speed reading, so I want more than just the abstract. So I'm going to look for the full text link. And here it is for me, full text length here in red. I click on that, and it should take me to the full article. Now, I'm a little hesitant because I look over to the left and I see where I've circled in yellow something that says EPUB ahead of print. So I'm going to be a little nervous now. And sure enough, when I click on the full text link that I had circled in red, this is where PubMed sends me. It takes me to a place where I have to pay for it. So it turns out it's not free, at least not yet. If I want to read this article, I'm either going to have to rent it for a couple of hours, a couple of days, or I'll find it in the cloud, which means I can read it, but I can never print it and I can't save it. Or I'm going to have to pay if I want the full article to have in my hand right there and to be able to print it out and save it for later. And you can see it can get quite pricey. That's $38 just for that article, or $6 to be able to rent it. And if you're looking at a lot of articles, that could get very pricey. Anyway, what EPUB means is that it's an electronic publication before it actually came out in ink in print. EPUBs are not necessarily free to download until the original article then comes out in hard print. So even though it said it's in full text, it's not in full text yet. It would be, and I don't have time to wait because I'm due to rounds very shortly. So let's try it again. I go back to my list, and here's another one that captures my attention. It says, Hope and Connection. The experience of family caregivers of persons with dementia living in a long-term care facility. So I click on it, and sure enough, I can get the full text, and here it is. So now let's go back to the speed reading process. I've read the title. The title is descriptive enough. It not only gives me a good idea of what it's about hope and connection with family caregivers of persons with dementia living in a long-term care facility. It also captures my attention because this is exactly the issue that the social worker is concerned about, that they're going to have to take the patient and put them in a long-term care nursing facility, and what's going to happen with the family. Parenthetically, let's just say that the social worker knows that the caregivers of each of these patients really are resistant to the idea of having to put their loved one, place them in another home. So this is going to be a really relevant article for this purpose. So let's continue on with step 2. I'm going to read the abstract, and I'm reading it to get a sense of the who, the what, the when, the where, the how, and what they found. And for the who, this article tells me that there are 13 family caregivers of residents with dementia in long-term care facilities. And that's who they've been focusing on for this article. That's the who. For the what is their experiences of hope. They want to explore the hope experience of these caregivers. The where, long-term care facility. The how, they used open-ended face-to-face interviews that were analyzed using what they call an interpretive description approach, looking for hope-related themes. And lastly, what did they find? They found that there's a connection between hope and being connected to or maintaining relationships with family. So I've got the abstract, a sense of the who, what, when, where, how, and what they found. There wasn't much of a when here. Now, just parenthetically, this was a qualitative study. And qualitative studies are very different from other kinds in that they're not trying to predict anything. They're not trying to measure any outcome. They're only wanting to discover some idea about hope or discover what's going on for family caregivers when they have to have their loved one placed in a long-term care facility. They just want to discover some ideas around that. The main reason I'm showing this slide is from part 1, is to say that you have to understand the limits of the kind of research method that's being used. If you look at the last line there, the how the participants are chosen, these are small sample sizes. So remember, there's only 13. And you cannot generalize the results. So we're going to be aware of the potential limits of whatever we're reading in this paper and not try to make it say things that it's actually not saying. But back to the speed reading. So now we're at step 3, figuring out the purpose of the study. And remember I said, look at the last paragraph before the methods section. And if it's not there, it's going to be close by. And sure enough, it's the last sentence in the last paragraph, which says, thus, the purpose of this study was to explore the hope of family caregivers of persons with dementia residing in a long-term care facility. So you can also see how they defined family in this, because I didn't put, that's where the ellipses are, but they're using broadly defining as family or friend, whoever is the caregiver of the persons with dementia. So that's the purpose, to explore. Remember, that's qualitative, just to get some ideas about the idea of hope with caregivers regarding their family member going into a long-term care facility. Step 4, we're going to look at the results and figures by going straight to the tables and figures. And remember I said that a good study will summarize all of its important results using these kinds of graphic displays. Most of the time, Table 1 summarizes demographic information about a study sample. This is like in most papers, I would be willing to guess 95+% of research papers, the Table 1 is going to summarize the participants in the study. So let's go look at the Table 1 in this particular article. And here it is. And remember, this one's an easy one because it's just listing a variable. There it says Table 1, demographic characteristics of participants, and 3 columns of that. And it just lists various characteristics of the participants. And remember, the participants were the caregivers, not the patients themselves, not the people with dementia. So it's just a list of their characteristics and then some number next to it. In this case, it could be what the average number, the mean number of years in age or education, or the length of time they've been in caregiving, and then also the age of the person with dementia. So it could be the mean, or it could be frequency, what percent of the population that they looked at, these 13 people, what percent of them were female and male, where they were living, urban or rural, their ethnic origin, marital status, etc., etc. So you're just kind of looking at that. And for this purpose, one of the things you're going to look at is that so you can have a snapshot of who were these people. And the reason for that is, are they like my people? Are they like the patients that I'm about to see on the unit? Is there something that they, in the trends of who these people are that could be useful for how I'm thinking about my patients? So that's what you're looking for in looking at that particular table, which is generally demographics for Table 1. Now, not all studies will have tables, particularly qualitative studies. And that's the case with this paper. They don't have anything other than Table 1. They do not have a table that shows their results from their interviews. And that's really too bad. What they do have, however, and this is what you would do if you don't see any other tables in a qualitative study, is you look at the headings for each section, subheadings in the results section. So they have descriptions of hope, and they have these following headings. Number 1, hope and connection, accepting where we are, living life in the moment, believing in something, standing together, and balancing dual worlds. Now, I'm going to be a little critical of this article. I really think that the authors could have done the readers a really wonderful service by making this into a table. Excuse me. Each column would be one of these descriptions of hope, and then each column. And then across the rows, say next to hope and connection, they could have had how they defined that, how, what that actually means, or some summary idea of what they captured. And then the third column could be some examples of quotes from the various face-to-face interviews that illustrate the different dimensions of hope and connection. That would have been a wonderful graphic to put in there, but the authors didn't do that, so we just would have to go look at the headings in the different the subheadings in the results section. Now we're going to go back and reread the abstract to determine whether this is something we want to read more and more detail or not. But in our case, we don't have more time because we've gotten the article, we've downloaded it, we sped read it, excuse me. And so now you're looking at the clock and you've got 5 minutes to rush up to the unit and to be on the rounds and to be able to have a conversation when you're on rounds. And what would that conversation look like? So you're at the bedside or right outside the door of one of the patients, and the social worker said, yes, I'm really concerned about Mr. Jones's wife. She can't take care of him at home anymore. She herself has a lot of health problems, and she's no longer really able to keep up with the demands of his dementia. So the social worker says, I've been discussing with her the possibility of him going into a long-term care facility, and she's really upset about that. This is your time now as a chaplain to chime in and say, well, it's very interesting. I just read about a qualitative study that looked at hope and what's the experience of family caregivers when their loved one has to go into a long-term care facility. So I have some ideas now, because one of the things that the study suggested was to explore the notion of hope and connection, of how they can maintain a connection with their loved one, because that might be useful to the family, and it could help in some ways with Mrs. Jones's anxiety here. So I'll go in and provide some spiritual care and comfort and talk about hope and connection with her. And you have now risen to the star of the interdisciplinary show, and you've done good. So that is how you speed read and use the speed reading of an article. And to summarize one more time, you read the title, you read the abstract, you figure out the purpose of the study, you look at all the figures and tables, and then you go back and reread the abstract. That's how you speed read a research article. If you have any questions, certainly feel free to ask your faculty member if you're from CIIS and watching this as a part of an assignment. I'm sure they'll be able to answer a lot of your questions, and if not, they can certainly, particularly Alec, can get in touch with me and pass on your questions, and I'll do my best to answer them. And I want to thank you for your time. I'll also say, if you'd like to ask me a question directly or any kind of feedback whatsoever, there's my email address. I'm kind of slow to read that and respond to email, so it might be quicker to ask Alec first, but otherwise I'm happy to invite any comments that you have or questions. Thank you so much.